Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of LPA Presents. I'm your host, Matthew D. Rhodes, and today we have a special treat for you. We're diving into the world of storytelling, exploring the intricate minds behind the scenes. Our guest today is none other than Chris Watt, the brilliant screenwriter behind the 2023 movie The Mire. We're going to unravel the layers of creativity, delve into the mindset that brought the cinematic masterpiece to life, and explore the magic that happens behind the scenes. So grab your favorite beverage, find a cozy spot, and let's embark on this journey into the art of storytelling with the talented Chris Watt. Welcome to LPA Presents. It's good to have you here.
Thank you, Matthew. It's good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Now, I got to know, what inspired you to write The Mire and explore the theme of a charismatic cult leader?
The inspiration for the Mire started about 10 years ago. I was working as a manager in a hotel, and every year there was this gentleman, an evangelist preacher, who would stay over a series of weeks in the summer. And he used to sit in our lobby with his laptop, and he would do these one-on-one sermons over Skype with members of his congregation. And it stuck with me, this notion of faith and belief structures in the 21st century. And I knew it was something that I wanted to write about one day. Our online lifestyle has certainly in the last 10 years or so become so much a part of how we live, how we socialize,
Yeah.
how we worship even. And yet there's a natural disconnect there as well, I think, which makes it almost paradoxical. And you take all of these elements and you marry it to a group of characters. That seemed to me like a good foundation for a story. But the screenplay itself started around 2020 with the idea of a liar trapped by his own lies. When Adam Nelson, who directed the film, and I had our first discussions about what kind of a film we wanted to make together, the idea of exploring a cult was the one we both sparked to. And so I went to my desk, I opened my notebook of plots that had no narrative attached to them at this point, and I gave Adam 3 or 4 scenarios, but the one that stuck was the notion of this cult leader attempting to leave his fabricated community and having him caught by 2 of his sort of higher up, most devout believers. That seemed to me like a great hook to play with this catch-22 notion of a man who could inspire these people to give him everything, but then find that everything has a price. And so I'd read a lot of books about these communities, particularly about Jim Jones of the People's
Yeah.
Temple, and Marshall Applethwaite of the Heaven's Gate community, which is one of the more predominant ones that I remember from when I was growing up. That was the one that really stuck in my head. But I'd also read about Manson, and that notion of the loudest voice in the room. But interestingly, the majority of the literature I was reading had a recurring element, and that was it was a survivor's perspective. So I knew that I wanted to write about every aspect, using 2 follower characters as well as the leader to show the potential human cost of this type of manipulation.
Well, how did you approach crafting such a complex character?
Oh, of Joseph, the main character?
Yes.
Yeah, he was not a nice character to put myself inside the head of, I'll be honest. And I was glad when I finally put him to one side. I had conceived Joseph Layton a few years earlier as a character that I might want to write a story about one day. Often, and you'll know this, you're a writer, often characters will come to you and they'll stick in your mind, but you don't always necessarily have a story to place them to. But I always knew that he was this snake oil salesman, a man who could charm and entice, a manipulator, not necessarily an antagonist at that point. But once I found the story and a context for who he was, it became clear that he could be this formidable manipulator, a dangerous mixture of politician and seducer, like a man who ran for political office, but he never made the grade. And so shaping him became about breaking down who he was, giving him a history, and most importantly, understanding what he wanted. He's an egotist. He's a man who likes the position he's crafted for himself. And he's almost blissfully ignorant of the power his lies can have. And I think that The Mire is a story about those figureheads and the ripple effect of that power.
Now, can you share some insights into your collaboration with director Adam Nelson and how you translated your script into visual storytelling?
Yeah, sure. Well, Adam and I connected about 6 years ago when I was working as a film journalist.
Mm-hmm.
I'd been given a screener for his debut feature film that he'd made a few years back called Little Pieces, and he was very appreciative of the review I gave. I liked it very much, but I remember thinking that for the budget he must have had, which he later told me was just peanuts, he
Yeah.
had a strong grasp of allowing characters to dominate a narrative, which is something I'm always interested in. And I thought, if this guy has the right material and the means to do it, he's going to be capable of making some really interesting films. And so we corresponded for a few years via Twitter. Actually, we were DMing back and forth, and we'd exchange projects here and there with each other just to have a look at. I even reviewed another of his short films, Emotional Motor Unit, which was this wonderful little science fiction that he made.
Hmm.
And eventually asked to read a screenplay I had just finished, which he was very keen on taking on. But in the midst of him looking into whether he could do it or not, another producer I was working with at the time actually optioned that project as well. So I had to let Adam down on that film,
Oh.
which a year, yeah, which he always likes to say that I sold out, which I mean, I suppose technically I did because I took money rather than nothing. But
Hmm.
I've got a daughter, I've got a house, I need to pay, I need to buy food. So I had to let Adam down on that film, which a year later it was produced and it became a film called Stalker, which we premiered at Fright Fest in London, and it had a little theatrical release in the States. It's out on DVD now, and that was directed by a friend of mine, Steve Johnson, and it starred Sophie Skelton from Outlander. And that did fine, but while that project was no longer available, I felt because Adam had shown interest in it so early on, it felt like I owed Adam one, and so I decided to approach him, and I offered him a compromise. I said, "Look, give me a subject matter and I'll write a film for you." And from that conversation came the genesis of the Mire. And working with Adam, I found to be a really rewarding experience.
Hmm.
He'll hate me for saying, I'm going to gush now about him a little bit, but he's very he's very driven. When he decides to do something, he does it. And if he doesn't like something, which is the best thing about him, if he doesn't like something, he just flat out tells you.
Right.
And I like that kind of honesty. Somebody who knows what they want and knows what they don't want. And it was a different experience for me, only in the sense that I had the freedom to write what I wanted to write, but it was for the director. So he would be on top of every draft and we'd have our conversations, and I would then rewrite from the notes we both had. And it felt quite organic. He thinks in imagery, and I think in how you connect the words with a suggestion of the visuals, but I never write specifics. If you do your job as a screenwriter, you can paint a picture, but also leave it completely open to interpretation for a director. I
Right.
think when a writer starts to deal in describing a shot, you're on shaky ground because how you see it is never going to be how another person is going to see it. And you have to find that sweet spot to satisfy both creative points of view. It's collaboration in the best sense, really, as every word of the script is mine, but it's
Right.
influenced by a coming together of ideas, essentially.
Right. But as a screenwriter, you can't just rely on just saying this is the way it needs to be. And you're expected that things will change in the process.
Absolutely. You have to be, particularly if you're just a screenwriter, as I am. I'm not a director and I'm not a producer, and I don't really have aspirations to be so.
Hmm.
And so if you work professional screenwriter, you have to be willing to not have this kind of auteur mentality about it, because half the time, if you're too auteur about it, nothing will ever get made. You have to factor in the fact that a director is going to have a vision for what they're reading of your work. See, I've been lucky enough to work with directors who have been willing to have the conversations with me, who have been willing to develop with me,
Hmm.
and we end up with a version of the script that satisfies everyone, which I think is a great way to be. It's not always the way in this world, unfortunately, and I've worked on some projects where I've just been writer for hire, and I come in and do my work, and if they change it, I don't really have a say in it. But those are the projects you don't really put a huge amount of yourself into because they
Yeah.
are assignments, essentially.
Well, I was telling you earlier about my pilot screenplay. I actually want to be an auteur director on that one, though I know that's not going to be likely.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you never know with these things, depending on the kind of producers you can get attached to it.
Hmm.
Some producers are very keen to work with new filmmakers because, without people working with new filmmakers, we don't get the Damien Chazelles, we don't get the Ari Asters, we don't if unless people are willing to take a risk on certain things. Often creativity gets stifled and we end up with just the same stuff over and over again. And cinema does, have this recurring pattern of genres that they tend to do, and they're all the same movie over and over again. We need distinctive voices. So it's
Right.
not completely out of the realm of possibility that something you write, as long as you stick to your guns. You have to be really tough in this industry, I think. But I can't imagine how hard that would be, because I just work as a writer. So I'll hand over a script and say, what do you think of it? And
Mm.
that's how the conversation starts for me.
But of course, a lot of the major production studios will actually stick to something that's safe.
Yes, absolutely. Because films cost so much money now. I mean, sometimes films cost too much money. I mean, we've seen this year, particularly blockbusters have been incredibly expensive to produce and have
Mhm.
not been making a return back that really justifies the price tag. I mean, I'm one of the few people in this country anyway. I haven't really looked much at what critics said, but I'm one of the few people that really quite liked the last Indiana Jones movie. But
Yeah.
that movie, I believe, cost about 300 million to make. I mean,
Oof.
you're on to a loser with that already, because you have to make that back and whatever it costs to market that. And then that's you just breaking even. I mean, that's really difficult to sort of make back that kind of money.
And see, the project that I want to work on is called Shadow Legacy, would have to be animated. And I would actually fire anybody who wanted to make it live action, because there's no way I'm going to let someone pull the Lion King Disney live action and get
Right.
away with it.
It was a very pointless exercise. I mean, there was a technical feat going on in that movie, but other than that,
Mhm.
there was nothing there. And frankly, you can get away with certain things with animated animals that you just can't when you sort of do that visual realistic version. Animals that look realistic talking, it just looks dumb. Whereas in cartoon animated format, it works. And
Right.
it's weird. It's crossing that sort of invisible wall, or how they always say whenever you do CGI created humans, there's that uncanny valley thing going
Yeah.
on. The same thing happening with animals there. I just find it very, very hard to take seriously, I suppose. So stick to your guns, keep it animated,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Now, the Mire delves into the battle of wits between characters. How did you develop the tension and suspense in the screenplay?
Mm. Well, it helps to have a cinematic clock in your plot, I think. The time is running out motif has been
Hmm.
a staple of telling as a means to create tension and suspense. I mean, Hitchcock used it all the time. And I'm always very fond of when I talk to other screenwriters, I say, well, think of the beginning of Touch of Evil. That begins on a close up of a bomb that gets set, put into a car, and then the car drives off. Now that's in the back of your mind throughout the whole of that opening. When's that bomb going to go off? So you're already on the edge of your seat. And
Hmm.
so, you know, by setting the film of the Mire over the course of one night with the tease at the beginning that something is going to happen at 7:15 a.m. and we don't know what that is necessarily, it means that the audience is hopefully going to be leaning in rather than sitting back at that point.
Hmm.
Um, and I think the dynamics of the characters need to be clear as well. I knew that I was only going to focus on three people, and each of them wants something different from the other. So you approach the drama almost like chess or like a strategy game of some sort. There's a
Hmm.
number of ways night in the story could play out. So I had to consider all of them in my head before I started writing a single page. I mean, I personally think it's also important to know your ending, at least when it comes to stories of suspense, as you want to build to it. A good story should unfold and should expand the concept to its breaking point.
Yeah. Can you talk about your writing process when creating the dialogue?
I mean, I'm very, very specific when it comes to dialogue. I like it to tell us something about the character, and
Hmm.
often in my own work, I will seed something that will come back later, be that a key line of dialogue or a concept. I like layering scenes so that if you revisit the film a few times, you'll find something new each time, you know. But really, in terms of sustaining intensity, you have to treat each scene like the next step towards a destination, and the power shifts between each character as we learn more and more about them and where they come from. I'll often set an end point for a conversation, then just start the characters talking, and I'll make it a writing exercise almost. Sometimes I even write a scene that I'm not even intending to put into the movie. It's just to get the writers talking. I'll say, I'm in a room, I've got the three characters, they start talking. And then I'll just let the conversation go, and I'll maybe do 9 or 10 pages of just dialogue. But out of that, I can find little points that I'm like, right, there's an interesting starting point, and there's an interesting end point of a conversation. And I'll plug that into the script. So I'll often set an end point, start the characters talking. By that point, the process becomes more about trying to keep up with what the characters are saying. As the more I get into the scene, the less conscious I am that the words are coming from me, which I know sounds strange, but I think you'll probably know yourself. When you're writing a scene, after a while, it almost becomes the screenwriter Bruce Robinson, who wrote With Now and I. He was interviewed once. He said that it's like tuning a radio in your head, and
Yeah.
some days you get it really clear, and these voices just are coming really fast, and it feels a little bit like that. And so that can often culminate in scenes that are overlong, but that's what rewriting's for. And the tighter
Right.
you can get a scene, the better, I think. Now, that isn't always the case. Sometimes a scene will dominate. So a scene sometimes demands being a little longer than 3 or 4 pages sometimes. But a good mantra, I think, to follow is kill your darlings. Whatever your favorite scene is in your work, tear it out and then see if the story is affected by it being gone. 9 times out of 10, it won't be. But Danny Boyle, I think, does that when he's editing his films. He says, whatever my favorite shot is in my movie, I take it out because it's surplus to requirement.
With Shadow Legacy, even in the novel, I find that killing off characters actually helps the story.
Well, it gives you something. Sometimes you can write yourself into a wall, I find, and sometimes you're like, well, I don't know where I'm going with this. What if I throw a hand grenade into the scene? What will that do to it? Martin McDonagh, who wrote The Banshees of Inisherin and 3 Billboards and In Bruges, he's a very good writer at doing that. He throws hand grenades into his scenes all the time. There's a wonderful scene in 3 Billboards between Woody Harrelson and Frances McDormand when he's kind of, the whole scene is about him kind of goading her about the fact that her husband ran off with somebody that was like 20 years old or something like that. And the scene's going along, and it's funny and it's brutally and it's nasty. And all of a sudden, Woody Harrelson coughs up blood and it sprays on Frances McDormand's face. And suddenly the scene completely changes direction and goes to a completely different place that was not set out. You can tell. And it's amazing how he just throws something into the scene and blows it up. And like you say about your book, sometimes killing a character suddenly opens up a whole bunch of doors to you that you maybe were not considering. So it's not a bad practice, I think.
As a screenwriter, how do you approach character development, especially when dealing with morally complex figures like Joseph Layton?
For someone like Joseph Layton, it was more a case of finding the root of who he was and also looking at the history of that character and trying to be morally ambiguous as well. I think you have to, actors talk about this quite a lot, this idea that you have to kind of not judge your characters, particularly your antagonists, because you have to understand their point of view, what they're doing, why they're doing it. And it always felt to me that, one of the things I was adamant about with this was that it shouldn't be a religiously specific community that he's created. There are shades of religion, but the core belief system of the canon, which is the cult that I created for the story, is based more in a scientifically driven area of who we are, where we came from. So despite the fact it's set in a church, it isn't a film that is attacking any one belief system. And I wanted that for the character of Joseph as well, the idea that, there's background information that the audience isn't going to know about the character, but I have to give a sense of them. And that's part of it. And it's the same with the Marshall and the Hannah characters. You have to make them relatable. You have to allow the audience to see something of themselves, I think, in that character. And I think that with the character of Marshall and Hannah, they represent thematically this sense of danger, the sense of the potential loss, and the potential of just the idea that Joseph's words have so much power and so much influence over these people, and it's a dangerous thing to have to play with.
Now, the film stars Adam Nelson, Joseph. How do you pronounce that name?
Adelakun.
And Holly, was it McLaughlin?
McLachlan, yes, yeah.
Yes. How did you envision these characters while writing, and how did the cast bring them to life?
Well, actually, I mean, it doesn't star Adam Nelson. He's the director.
Right.
It's Joseph Adelakun, Holly McLachlan. They play Marshall and Hannah, and it's Anthony Knight plays Joseph Layton. I think the cast had more influence over the writing than they probably even realize.
Hmm.
As we did an early read through of the script when I think I was still in about the second or third draft, and they'd already been cast at this point, and we'd done online casting because everything was done over Zoom.
Hmm.
And as Anthony, Holly, and Joseph were cast while I was still rewriting the drafts, it became abundantly clear to me as we did this amazing Zoom call where we read through the entire script just how much they were going to be able to nail these characters, and hearing their voices for characters that I already had voices in my head for was really interesting. One of the things that I found most interesting from that experience was the evolution of the Hannah character came directly from Holly's early interpretation of her. What she was doing with that character just in that read through was just, there was something so spectacularly right about it that Adam and I later on, after the read through had been done, we got onto another Zoom call and said, I think the third act is too light on that character, and I think you need to bring her forward and give her more to do. And in that next rewrite, I started building up her character more, and she kind of becomes the heart and soul of the picture, which is interesting because before that it was more balanced towards the two men, and the film as it now is more focused on her character and her journey and her arc. So that was really interesting to me, and having good actors really helps. And I think we really played a blinder with this because finally getting to see the first rough cut of the film,
Hmm.
because I wasn't there for the shooting because I live up in Scotland and it was shot down in Portsmouth, which is right at the bottom of England, and we were in the middle of COVID at that time as well, so there was no way I was going to get down there. So finally seeing what they did with the characters was just extraordinary, and to see what a good actor does to your dialogue and to hear your dialogue with where they'll put inflections on a different word than maybe you would have put on there when you were reading it back in your mind.
Yeah.
It makes all the difference, and it changes dynamics, and it changes the power struggle in the room, and it's a really fascinating part of the process. But it is also one of the reasons I probably could never be a director, because I just don't know how actors do that. They're amazing. Whenever they know what they're doing, they're just extraordinary.
Or I can understand having an actor help, excuse me, change the writing of the screenplay. When I first wrote the pilot episode for Shadow Legacy, I had gotten voice actors to try and do the script for me so I can hear what it would sound like, and I got Tracy Fowle to play one of the characters. And when I heard her in the role, it's like, I wanted to increase how that character was actually portrayed.
Yeah, yeah, and that's funny, isn't it? Sometimes that you can imagine that happening with TV series as well. If they don't have an endpoint for a TV series, ratings will tell you which character is most popular, and you'll start to see in second or third series they'll bring those characters forward because a lot of times producers and executives are like, that works best, put that in there. But often it can be a really great creative decision where you're like, this character is really working for me. We can do a lot more with this because this actor is capable of doing a lot more with this. So let's give it to them. So it was the same with Holly. Whenever we cast her, I think each of us, when we saw her audition, we had a very, very good feeling that she was going to bring something else to the character that wasn't on the page. And that's what you
Mhm.
want as a writer as well. I think, again, it comes back to that auteur idea that a lot of writers are too precious about their characters. You have to remember, once those actors are given those parts, they have to go away and make it their own because
Yeah.
they're the ones that have to interpret this. So you have to give them leeway as well. And in the case of someone like, and also in the case of Joseph and Anthony, they really ate into those parts. I mean, I think we even said to him before we started this movie, we said, Joseph Layton is your Daniel Day-Lewis in There Will Be Blood. That's this kind of character. We want you to do something special with this character, make him memorable. Whereas Joseph playing Marshall, he had to go to somewhere. I mean, he's a theater actor as well, Joseph, and he's an extraordinarily good at subtleties and shifts in the performance and shift in mood. So watching him do something with my dialogue was just really a joy.
Of course, in some situations, even if a character dies, they still have a role to play later on.
Absolutely, because again, it's ripple effects as well. The impact of a character not being there can often be just as powerful. You see it in classic love stories when one of the lovers dies, and there's a whole third act that has to go into the impact of that person not being there as much as it is about when the person is there.
Yeah. I mean, even in my book, I took one character and tried to build them up only just to kill them off. And people that were reading like, why'd you do that?
Why did you do that?
What roles do the setting play in the Mire, and how did you use it to enhance the story?
Well, that's a good story as well. The King's Church in Portsmouth is like a main character in the story. Adam, he knew he had access to this amazing building. And that was another interesting element of my writing process, as he told me he wanted to set the film there, and even sent me the layout of the building so I could write certain scenes or for certain rooms, which I've never had done to me before. I've never had someone say, I know I've got this location, write for this. So there's a grand this place that fits the character of Joseph. And I like the idea of having this huge canvas, but the focus is intimate. That creates its own natural tension too. That's a cinematic idea, to use environment as a character. I just rewatched last week Ridley Scott's Blade Runner, the original Blade Runner, and that's a good example of that, how the environment can make that type of story and those types of characters suddenly make sense in a way that they maybe wouldn't necessarily make sense in a different setting, in a different period, that sort of thing. The church is Joseph's world, but it's also a prison for him. Whereas for Hannah and Marshall, it's been a salvation of sorts, and that has to be reflected in the story, as they are willing to do whatever it takes to maintain it and to see things through. And it has an air of worship and history to it that plays into the tone of the film, which is quite serious, but there's also something quite playful in places about it, as there's something of a court jester feel to Joseph as a character and to his methods. But just in terms of production value, it's an immensely impressive setting, a setting that reflects the bigger themes of the story, but it also dwarfs the characters, making them seem so small in the scheme of things. I mean, Adam's very keen on continuing to make films that are set in Portsmouth. It's a city that doesn't really get much screen time in certainly in UK cinema, and it has some really unique elements that lend it to certain types of stories. I mean, I think the only time a major motion picture really shot there was the Les Miserables. When they did the film version of that, they used some of the harbour elements there because they've got period harbour features there for the boats and all that sort of. But it's a really interesting city, and not a city I'd been to until the experience of them shooting the Mire. So it's nice to see a filmmaker that's, particularly a UK filmmaker, who's willing to make films outside of London, because pretty much every British film made is set either in London, or if it's Scotland, it's set in Glasgow. It's one of the two, and there's an entire country that you can play with here, and there's a lot of cinematic possibilities in other places.
I've talked to a lot of other writers, and they don't seem to understand that setting itself is a character.
Oh yeah. Big time. I mean, it can be real, and it can be very crucial to your plot as well. Depending on where you set something, can sometimes change the trajectory of where the story goes. You can do the indie filmmaker thing where you just take two characters, stick them in a room, and have them talk. But if you have two characters and stick them in an interrogation office, all of a sudden you've got a different dynamic, and then you've got a policeman, you've got a criminal, then you've got a story. There's so many ways that setting can influence what things become. And again, cinematically, you look at someone like Ridley Scott and how he builds worlds, and the environment is so much a part of that. Gladiator isn't Gladiator without Rome, and Blade Runner isn't Blade Runner without Los Angeles in the mid 20s. And it's all about allowing it also to reflect the characters as well, by making it as much a part of who they are as it is just setting and just a visual treat.
I mean, in my pilot episode, Shadow Legacy, I actually dive into a setting called The World Beyond Dreams, and which is tied to a character's emotion and what happens when that emotion becomes too strong for the location itself.
Right, right. And that opens up so many possibilities as well. That you can literally do anything within that sort of environment as well. Because just the name of that place, you immediately like, well, what does it look like? Well, it could look like anything. And what can you do there? You can do anything. And that allows you to take a story in any number of directions and do whatever you want and have different characters. And I take my hat off to anyone that can write fantasy. It's something I haven't really tried my hand at yet. And I can look at things like Lord of the Rings, and I can look at things like Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and or Star Wars, places that are able to create a vast universe of places and characters. And it's so impressive to me that people. I think it's more a case of time. I don't know where people find the time to do that sort of stuff, because I don't have the time to write that kind of thing. Maybe one day.
I actually would love to get your take on my pilot.
Well, you know what? I'd love to read it, so we'll sort that out, definitely.
Okay. How do you think the film's exploration of manipulation and loyalty might resonate with the audience?
That's a good question. I think, particularly in the 21st century, we've become too focused on quick fixes, and the internet has exacerbated that idea. And I think that that's the first jumping off point for audiences who see the film, will be that they'll recognize that longing to be a part of something, or to be spoon-fed answers to tough life questions. Excuse me, getting dry. There is a morality tale about this is a morality tale about an immoral person, and yet the main character is able to take what is a pretty far out concept and make it believable. And I want audiences to come away from our film with a fear of those kind of people. The Gospel of Matthew talks about beware the prophet bearing false gifts, and we're now living in a culture where we would rather Google a symptom than go to a doctor. We don't check as thoroughly as we probably should, because so much information is available. But who's to say that information is correct? But we just take it as read a lot of times. This is a story about looking beyond what is right in front of us and seeking connections that are not coming at a price.
Yeah.
Because this story explores themes of loneliness and how we are perceived by other people. And I hope that in the characters of Marshall and Hannah, people will see something of themselves. If that loneliness, or the huge amount of strength that those two characters eventually have to display, and they get most of that courage from each other. And that's a central tragedy in the plot. The fact that it took a con man to put these two people together at a time when they need someone just like them, but they're unaware of how much their relationship has been planned and manipulated. And it just creates this terrible situation. But in that respect, it's about coercive behavior, which is a problem that affects a large number of people. And that's relatable, even in this cinematic context where you have to take it to a next level.
Lastly, can you tease any upcoming projects or ideas you're currently exploring in your writing?
Yeah, sure. The most recent project that I've just finished, that's finished its post-production. In fact, they just had the first cast and crew screening of it yesterday. Is a short film that I co-wrote with a friend of mine, Carrie Dodds, and it's called The Pursuit of Independence, which is about a relationship between two sisters, one of whom has a learning disability but wants to live as independent a life as she can. And essentially, it's a story that explores, particularly in the UK, the sheer amount of red tape that is in the way for people who want to live as independent a life as they can, and the system's just not built correctly for that sort of stuff. So I've got that, and we're hoping that'll do a festival run in the new year. But as a screenwriter, I'm constantly working on projects. I know you probably are too.
Yeah.
My slate for next year includes I've got to finish this horror feature film script that I've been working on for a very long time called Penumbra, which deals with hypnosis. And I'm outlining at the moment a science fiction feature film which deals with our relationship and our dependency on technology.
Yeah.
And I'm also enough to have a number of other feature and TV projects that are in different stages of production and development. that it's a long process working in screenwriting, because often there'll be 2 or 3 years where it doesn't look like you're producing anything, but I am still working on things. It just takes a long time for these things to actually get to. But I mean, the Mire, we're finally getting to the point where this is going to start being seen by people. We
Yeah.
started work on it 3 years ago, so it's a long process, and sometimes you don't see the results for years, but patience is constantly the name of the game. But as long as the ideas and stories keep coming to me, I'm always going to be ready to write them down.
Last time I tried writing a short, it was a horror film, and I couldn't sleep for days afterwards. I can't do horror.
No. I mean, I've got a slight reputation in the UK. I mean, I'm not hugely well known, but among the sort of screenwriting Twitter and that sort of thing, I'm kind of, my name's known a little bit. I've got this reputation for being some sort of a horror writer just because my first major feature film was horror. And I'm not really. In fact, I'm very particular about horror. The reason I'm writing this horror at the moment is because I've got an idea that feels quite original. And I think anytime you get something that feels original, you want to move forward with it as quickly as possible, because sometimes somebody else has got the same idea and will get in the way of that. But
Right.
generally, I prefer things like, I like dramedy more than anything. I like comedy drama. That's kind
Yeah.
of where that's where I think life lives, really. Life is a comedy and a drama at the same time, and I like things that are bittersweet. So although I'm sort of known for genre, I am trying to move myself away from that. I mean, the short films in particular. I did another short film last year that I wrote the script for, called Bruise, and that was a film that we shot in Ireland, and that was about domestic violence and sexual abuse. And it did very well. It won a bunch of awards at international festivals, and that's kind of the area that I'm moving towards. Pursuit of Independence is the same thing. It's kind of a human interest story more than anything.
Hmm.
So we're always working on things, but not necessarily in the horror genre. We'll see what happens, though. That, by the way, that's not saying that if Blumhouse calls up and says we'd like you to write the next or whatever, I am available, but
And that wraps it up for another engaging episode of LPA Presents. A huge thank you to Chris Watt for sharing his insights into the world of screenwriting and giving us a glimpse into the making of the Mire. Thank you for joining us today.
Oh, thank you, Matthew. It's a pleasure.
Before we go, a quick announcement to all aspiring actors, screenwriters, directors, and authors out there. If you're passionate about the craft and eager to learn more about the industry, make sure to tune in each month. We've got a lineup of industry professionals ready to share their experience, insights, and the secrets to their success. Whether you're dreaming of the silver screen, putting pen to paper, or sitting in the director's chair, LPA Presents is your backstage pass to the world of entertainment. Don't miss out on the chance to hear from the best in the business and discover the path to your own creative journey. Thank you all for joining us today. Remember, the next episode is just around the corner, so stay tuned, stay inspired, and keep creating. Until next time, this is Matthew D. Rhodes signing off.